So how did you get to know Greg Garrison?
Well, I did radio for 7 years, and I got to know Greg as a consequence of doing radio because we had him on air after the Mike Tyson verdict in his favor. He was the prosecutor, of course. And so we had him on air. I checked with our son, who kept a roster of that. Of course, he's also a lawyer, just like Greg, so you can never count on anything with those guys. Oh, gosh, if either one of them heard me say that, they'd both come after me. But we had Greg on after that, and of course he was then on with CBS as a legal analyst. And so we just got to be friends over the years, and I was a guest many times on his show. He was a guest many times on mine before I had the option at Fox, not Mr. Murdoch, but Mr. Ailes gave me the option of you can do television or radio, but you can't do both anymore, in large part because I was gone so much during the 2002, 2003 with Afghanistan and Iraq. And he's right. You cannot do radio very well on a cell phone or a satellite phone from overseas. So I had to give up radio. But I'll tell you, I've always admired the way Greg's interviews would go. I mean, how few people there are in the talk radio business today who would actually have a conversation with you. I mean, actually listen to what you said and not use pre-formulated questions that just kind of went off the charts, and actually had a conversation. And that's to me was the wonder of the show. I mean, it was great that he took over from Mike Pence, because Mike Pence owes him a debt of gratitude, I would think.
One story that Greg told me is how you guys ended up going to Israel.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really fascinating story. Maybe you can recount some of that.
Well, my recollection is that we both got invited by separate invites. I was invited by Fox to go over. He was invited by Tom Rose, who was then the publisher, and I think I've got it right, publisher of the Jerusalem Post. And so we ended up going at the same time, collaborated before we went, while we were there, did radio from over there, did some TV over there, in large part because the Israelis were looking for, they're looking for friends in America. And both of us, because of our, I think, more a spiritual than a political connection, felt very strongly about the state of Israel continuing to exist despite all of its neighbors. So Tom Rose was an instigator in that. Of course, Fox was for me. And Greg and I got to, spend some quality time with one another while we were over there.
Well, I'm glad that that your experiences kind of coincided there. We actually did an interview one day where he went into detail, about some of the things that he saw in Israel. Of course, you had experience, I'm assuming, before that. And,
oh, yeah.
I mean, obviously you had experience in the Middle East.
As it came up in I was invited to chat with Congress back in 1987.
Yes.
Actually, truth be known, I was subpoenaed, and I did go. And of course, it came out there that I had some very significant connections with Israel in their government at the direction of my president. So we were carrying out our orders, as we say.
Well, have you ever gotten to actually come to Indianapolis and see Greg's family or meet him personally?
I was all set to do that. We had the NRA annual meeting in Indianapolis a few years back. I was all set to do that, and I had a very serious reaction to something I had eaten before I got to Indianapolis. Let it be clear. And so I didn't get to see him. We were planning to get his family. Stuart was producing my radio show, or my television show at that point, and had every intention of getting together with him. Ended up making a quick visit to the hospital, survived the foodborne illness that I brought with me, thanks to the good docs out there at Memorial Hospital, I think it was, and never got to see his family. But I know of his family because of, one, the way he writes about them. And I don't know if you've read his children's book, but it's a terrific read. We got it for our kids. Our kids are now reading it to their kids. It's hard, I think, for Greg and I to realize we're grandparents now, and to see the effect of being I guess, he had 4 jobs in his life. He's been husband, father, radio broadcaster, and great host. And and of course, an author of a great children's book.
Well, this is fascinating stuff. I really did not know that he has had that much influence, on you and your family life as as a person.
Chris, I first of all, he is a friend. I mean, a dear, dear friend, and I'm going to miss being on his show. Number two, we have a spiritual connection. I mean, we both we know where we are going, and we know why we are going there, and are unashamed to say that and show it. I remember someone said of us at some point that you wear your faith on your sleeve. And it was either Greg or I'd like to claim the credit, but he's a much better wordsmith than I am. No, I don't wear my faith on my sleeve. I wear it in my heart. And that's why I love the guy so much. I mean, he's just a terrific human being. And as I say, I'm going to miss being on his show.
Have you ever talked about faith on the air with him?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about matters. Look, when you start talking about family issues with a couple of granddads that, as I put it, know where we're going and why we are going there, it's inevitable. And so I have no problem with it. I know he has no problem with it. There are times when I think some folks misunderstand what we're saying. It's not a denominational issue. It's not a particular church that you have to go to, because at the pearly gates, God does not check your ID card for what denomination you're in.
Yeah, there's too many of them.
Well, yeah, that's right. So I mean, I just think of a guy like Greg, who brings the perspective of a traditional conservative who believes in individual responsibility as well as individual rights, who has the kind of, in addition to being all those, he's a farmer. I mean, and I married a farmer, so I'm living on a farm as well. I know I don't ride as well as he does, because I have a great tendency to, get up on the horse and think, my head is now 10 feet from the ground. If I go off this thing, I'm going to land on the heaviest part of my body, and that's my head, and maybe break something. But he's a far better horseman than I am.
What do you guys? How do you line up with each other as far as politics go? I mean, it seems to me like it would be very close.
Well, let me put it this way: Mike Pence, who in some ways probably owes Greg an enormous debt of gratitude, is a friend of both of ours and represents the kinds of things that we both believe in. It's a traditional conservative perspective on life, not just in what government does. It's what government fails to do, the government trying to overreach and do too much. It's that kind of what I call a traditional conservative perspective. If I recall correctly, and Greg may come after me for this, I think his dad was a member of the John Birch Society, which nowadays, I mean, a pox upon you. Well, my dad was a member of the John Birch Society, World War II Korean War veteran, and his dad, if I recall correctly, is a doctor. My dad was a military man, and they were both what would now be described as right-wing zealots or something like that. But the conversations over our dining room table when I was a kid shaped who I am. I think Greg feels the same way. I'm pretty sure, based on what we've talked about it with one another. Those are really important. But we had a great advantage. We grew up in a two-parent family with a bunch of siblings, and there's a contest going on every minute, as I call it with our kids, a DBFA, desperate bid for attention. And so you better know what you're talking about when you open your mouth. And so a lot of that shaped my perspective as a radio host and is what I do for nowadays on television for Fox. And my sense is Greg shares that same kind of perspective based on where we came from.
Sure, and I think both of you guys came to the fore as far as the thirst for your political commentary, not when the Reagan administration was happening, but thereafter, when the 90s were going on, when it was something a completely different political landscape.
Yeah, and to a certain extent, we have a parallel existence, because his visibility. I don't like the word notoriety, because in today's usage, it portends some kind of negative. But we came to visibility as a consequence of a great controversy. In my case, it was Iran-Contra and the congressional hearings. In Greg's case, it was the Tyson's trial, and then his visibility afterwards as a CBS commentator, legal commentator. And I mean, those were great controversial things. There are people that think terrible things about Greg because of his prosecution of that case, and they're same with me for the things I didn't do. So there's a parallel in that kind of visibility as well, I guess.
Yeah, just thinking about that. I mean, there's some people who might think both of you guys would have this heavy load on your backs. Do you feel that way?
Oh no, no, not at all. In my case, it's the load I carry is that in the aftermath of what took place in 1997, my kids could never be themselves. My kids could never be just who they are. They were Ollie North's kids. And I've shared that thought with Greg on the air, I believe, because that's the burden I carry. I mean, even to this day, there are people. Our son is the only one that still has the last name, but and of course all of his kids. But my sense is that the girls got beyond it once they got married and changed their last names.
Yeah. Well, he's got this huge brood,
Oh yeah, no. I'm pretty sure Betsy and I, still have more grandchildren, but they're catching up fast.
Well, it was just interesting, talking to his family, kind of about the same thing, talking about the Tyson trial and their experiences with that and after that, and they had to have security during that.
Yeah.
And I know that probably while you were on TV, and I remember when I was watching this as a kid, I remember because it interrupted the Dukes of Hazzard in the afternoon. But I was a news junkie, and I watched that stuff. But I while you were on TV, I would imagine it was pretty much the same situation.
Well, in fact, even before we went on TV in July it's 30 years this summer. So 30 years ago, starting in February that year, when the Islamic Jihad tried to carry out the threat that they'd made a year before. They enlisted 11 people for assassination, and I was target number 11. And of course, higher up the food chain were Admiral Poindexter and Director Casey, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And once that threat was materialized, and they actually sent people to the house to recon it and then carry it out, we lived with 37 federal agents for the rest of my time in the service and for a good bit of time thereafter. We still have some security. Nothing quite like the parallels that we had before, but it was a challenging time, in part because initially all of the security agents were from the Naval Intelligence Service, now called NCIS, and they lived. We had 8 of them. We couldn't even say the number in those days. 8 of them lived permanently at the house. The rest of them would rotate on a PSD, a personal security detail, with Betsy, the kids, and me. And very challenging, particularly since they were all men. And at one point, I went back to the Commandant of the Marine Corps and I said, do they have any female agents? Because I'm living in a house with a wife and 3 daughters. Our son's off in school. And the Commandant, General Kelly, said, yeah, Barbara, his wife, has female agents. They assigned 4 of the most beautiful young women carrying Uzis you've ever seen to the detail. We couldn't get our son would not return voluntarily for things like Thanksgiving. Suddenly he was there every weekend. And there's pictures of these gorgeous, because they have to qualify every month. So he would make sure he was home for qualification times with the girls.
And qualify every month?
Yeah, because PSDs, they have to shoot and get the guy quickly. I mean, it's not a matter of laying down at the range and once a year like in the Marine Corps. And he came home literally every weekend. I mean, drove all the way up from Lexington, Virginia, to our house in Great Falls, Virginia. And there's pictures of Stuart with these gorgeous women, their arms draped around him, showing him how to hold the Uzi or whatever weapon that they were firing at the time. So it was a fascinating time. Let me put it that way. Yeah, it was. By the way, the good news is 2 of the girls married 2 of the guys on the detail at various points thereafter. So they'd met because of the security detail that we had.
Oh, it was all part of a grander purpose.
Exactly, and it worked to the good. Yeah.
Is there anything else that you would like to say about Greg and your time knowing him?
Look, for me, the most important factor in Greg's experience with me was the assurance that his values were solid, that his perspective was right on what's going on in the world, and he was a man of great faith. And I think if that carried out to some of our audience, if that carries out to other people who would suddenly take a look at the Holy Bible and say, there's something bigger going on, I'm not really a star in my own movie. If that was the result of what Greg and I had a chance to do together, and Greg, I think, to my knowledge, did just about every day on the air, then that tenure in talking to Americans will have been well served. It was a very valuable thing for your audience, for those who came to know something bigger than themselves as a consequence. That's a good thing.
Well, I'm going to tell you, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I'm grateful that you took time out of your day to converse with me about Greg.
Well, it's the least I could do, and he is a dear, dear friend, and I'm going to miss him in the business.